Good afternoon, everyone. So we are now ready to start the landmark presentation of the AUSIT conference, the Jill Blewett Memorial Lecture. This lecture was established by AUSIT in 1992 to honor the memory of the late Jill Blewett, an interpreter and a translator, a board member of NATI in the 1980s, who supported the development of the highest levels of certification at the time. She also played an instrumental role in developing guidelines for the establishment of TNI courses in Australia. Her efforts, passion and commitment largely contributed to making Australia a leader in the field of community-based interpreting. On that note, it is with the greatest pleasure that I would like to introduce our keynote speaker for this year's memorial lecture, Mrs. Marianne Baquero. She is the Chief Executive Officer of FECCA, the Federation of Ethnic Communities Councils of Australia, and she's presenting today on Forging Shared Understanding. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Marianne up to the stage.
Thank you, Aurelie. I hope you can all hear me. Right. Just to note that she said earlier, I changed the title of my presentation to Forging Shared Understanding. I just want to start by acknowledging that we are on Ngunnawal and Ngambri people lands, traditional custodians, where we are meeting this afternoon. I am recognizing their elders past and present. As the national peak body of for Multicultural Australia, we and I reaffirm FECCA's commitment to working alongside Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in truth, justice, and reconciliation. I honor the long history of language, interpretation, and oral knowledge in the world's oldest continuous cultures. I would like to thank AUSIT for the invitation. I know the circumstances behind this, but obviously, if you are invited by Erica Gonzalez to speak at the AUSIT conference, you don't say no. And I just realized this morning that she won't be in here today. She did message me. But it is indeed an honor to deliver the Jill Blewett Memorial Lecture to celebrate a pioneer who shaped professional and ethical standards for interpreters and translators. Today, I will share what multicultural communities see, experience, and what FECCA does to advocate for changes in collaboration with AUSIT and the broader sector. To us at FECCA, access to language support is not only a sectoral issue, it's a national equity issue that helps forge our collective understanding on how to move forward as a nation. Just a quick note about FECCA, we represent more than 1,500 community organizations across the country. One of our key responsibilities is to ensure that language, culture, and diversity are embedded in policy, service design, and accountability frameworks, not siloed or treated as afterthoughts. This is me greeting you good afternoon in many languages that I came across growing up in the Philippines. So this is a little bit about me. I grew up in the southern Philippines in an island called Mindanao, where all of these languages, except two, you see on screen, are spoken. These means good afternoon in Filipino, Cebuano, Hiligaynon, Maranao, Tagabawa, Spanish, Bahasa Melayu, and Bahasa Indonesia. I remember my heydays as a young student leader, and I had to speak bits and pieces of Arabic as well as, understand the language so I can connect with my Muslim cohorts. Linguistic diversity is nothing new for people like me who grew up in places like the southern Philippines. In our household in particular, we speak 5 different languages. Boholano for my mother's language, Hiligaynon for my father, Cebuano to speak to most of the people in the neighborhood, Filipino because that's the language of the dominant ethnic group, and English, of course, because that's the language of business. It's an official language. And that's the language we use to speak to our young children. It's funny, that's how Filipinos are. Once a child is born, we speak to them in English. And we also have a smattering of Spanish when speaking to some older persons who grew up in an education system where Spanish used to be mandated. I'm not quite old, but I'm in one of those last cohorts in this system. I learned Spanish for 4 years in university, but I would say I'm not very good at it. I lack the exercise. And Spanish speakers are fast, especially when they're very impassioned. So I can't keep up with the conversation. So my skill is really limited to reading simple news articles or going to Hola, the entertainment news in Spain to look at news about some stars that are famous in the Philippines. I guess that's good enough to save myself, in a Spanish context, but also to, share some bits and pieces of gossip. So this is me, some photos. It's really about what I can tell you, a work that I have been involved in that has involved interpreters and translators. When I moved to Singapore from the Philippines, like a decade ago, I worked with interpreters very often. For the photo on your right side of the screen, I was with older Singaporeans who spoke Mandarin, and the interpreter is in one of those people in the photo. I was leading a randomized controlled trial for a self-care program around the country, and the older persons here have completed a 20-week training and are proudly showing off their certificates. Other groups have the program in Bahasa Melayu, Hindi, and Tamil. In the other photo, left side, I was delivering a session on financial empowerment for women in Indonesia. Beside me is my colleague and my favorite interpreter, who can speak both Bahasa Indonesia and Mandarin. There was another photo of me in Tokyo having my first experience of simultaneous interpreting. Oh my God. While I was presenting the role of corporate social responsibility in my work for the UN Millennium Development Goals. I looked very unfamiliar and uncomfortable with the technology, so you could see it in my face, so that photo is not good for sharing this afternoon. So that has been my work in the last decade of my life before joining FECCA in 2019. I have been doing pilot testing, randomized controlled trials to build evidence together with communities so we can advocate for better policies and programs to governments in the 7 countries in the East and Southeast Asian region. So that's enough of me. I'm sure you're very familiar with these numbers, and you may have already seen this. This is really literally a snip out of the Multicultural Framework Review Report. What I can say is I bring lived experience personally and professionally here in Australia with my work at FECCA, dealing with multitudes of languages when we do our work day in, day out. From the recent census, we know that half of the population in Australia are born overseas or have parents who were born overseas. We have over 400 languages spoken, including close to 200 from the First Nations languages. Australia is definitely defined by its language diversity. About 6 million Australians speak a language other than English at home. You all know this very well. So it's not a context for a small number of people, because we can truly say language diversity is Australia. And that is why we are all here today, guided by visionary work of Jill Blewett. Demand for language services is expanding, not shrinking. We can see that in the data. The system must shift from emergency access to an integrated, rights-based approach. Just a bit of a history, and I think maybe most of the room would be familiar with this policy. In 2018, the Multicultural Access and Equity Policy was developed, acknowledging that we live in a truly multicultural society and that there is an obligation on the Australian government departments and agencies to ensure that their programs and services are accessible to all Australians and that these are responsive to their needs and deliver equitable outcomes for them, regardless of their cultural and linguistic backgrounds. Do you know that each year, government agencies are supposed to report on the progress of their respective Multicultural Access and Equity Action Plan against 6 key commitments: leadership, engagement, responsiveness, performance, capability, and openness. Who among you know that they have to report on these things? I think a lot of you know. One of the key areas of the policy is language support. It says language should not be a barrier and should not impede delivery of government programs and services. I'm just repeating that point. It must be acknowledged, though, that government has, in the recent years, invested millions. If I remember, someone said in the vicinity of about 300 million annually on language support. FECCA continues to engage government to proactively engage communities in delivering and reporting on their commitments and action. So we want government agencies to engage communities when they report on their access and equity policy work. You may be familiar with this. The Human Rights Commission recently published a report on health inequities, and it highlighted that barriers like language, lack of interpreters, and cultural insensitivity that lead to delayed diagnosis and poorer outcomes. For many people, according to the report, mistrust of healthcare systems is a direct result of these experiences. The report shows that institutional racism is a major determinant of health outcomes. It affects mental health, increases chronic disease risk, and reduces life expectancy. The Race Discrimination Commissioner Giradharan Sivaraman said the findings are a wake-up call for the nation, for all of us. When people are denied care, misdiagnosed, or treated with suspicion because of their race, the consequences are not just theoretical. They can be fatal. We cannot close the gap in health outcomes without confronting the racism that underpins it. That's what the commissioner said in the report. I just want to highlight at the outset that language support, we truly believe that language support is a human right. Recently, you may have seen this story on the ABC. Senna Husick needed interpreters who can assist her in person. It's a very sobering case. I encourage you to look at this news. I wanted to play the video, but it will take so much time. Linguistic rights are human rights that apply to everyone. The 1966 International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, a foundational human rights treaty, states that people who belong to linguistic minorities have the right to practice their culture and use their languages. Feeling safe and confident to discuss complicated and sensitive topics is a challenge for many people here in Australia, especially when they speak a language other than English. Here is another report, a snapshot of the report from the Center of Excellence in Population Aging Research, showing the association between language and health outcomes. This slide shows that there is a higher number of people from non-English speaking backgrounds who have diabetes, dementia, and other long-term health conditions. This slide, in particular, shows that poor English proficiency is associated with greater prevalence on mental health conditions, dementia, and diabetes. As the Race Discrimination Commissioner reported, these are concrete consequences when people don't have access to language support. Every one of you in this room, and including us at FECCA, has a very important role to play. We need to advocate and we need to make sure proper language support is available to people who need them. FECCA advocates for a strong language support sector since its inception over 40 years ago. As a more recent example, early in the COVID-19 pandemic, government messaging focused on providing translated materials. I won't talk so much about this because Professor Taibi has really shared quite substantially what we have done during this time. But a key insight that I would like to highlight is that communities are saying there is the importance of transcreating, rather than the direct translation of resources. What does transcreating mean? It means recreating content in a new language whilst adapting to suit the cultural and linguistic needs of the group. Transcreation retains the meaning of the original information whilst making it accessible to communities. From FECCA's point of view, it is the last stage of the process to making sure information materials are useful to their end users. It still happens now, actually, that we receive a whole lot of translated materials, and FECCA and its members are expected to circulate an electronic version of these information materials. However, community organizations are not supported to make sense of this information. Transcreation is the last part of this whole process. When we support community organizations to make sense, this is the missing link that I think we all need to think about and really make sure that moving forward, we have something to address this particular recommendation from our people in the community. The pandemic also forged a strong partnership between FECCA and AUSIT. And again, Professor Taibbi spoke about this earlier. And that partnership produced all these reference materials for everyone to use. It was a meaningful partnership and engagement with Erica Gonzalez, our keynote speaker earlier, Professor Mustafa Taibbi, and many others that produced these guidelines. So I really hope that all of us and any other stakeholders within the system will continue to use them. I would also like to share a little bit some insights from our Encompass program, which is a multicultural aged care connectors program to help older persons navigate the aged care system. What is critical for this particular program is the learning that came out of the study that Charles Darwin University created all throughout the program implementation. What we have learned is that connectors who were from the same community and spoke the same language as their clients, I think we have seen this on the ground, and those who were able to access relevant cultural knowledge and language support from colleagues within their employing organizations were most successful in engaging their clients. It's this combination of proactive and responsive approach that makes the system connect with the people who need the programs and services. What is also quite sobering for us to realize and see is that engagement via interpreter creates low rapport. It's not because the interpreters don't know their jobs, but it's really about connecting and for all the persons to feel that they are being heard. And in some cases, the interpreting is done via a telephone interview, which again creates that distance between the older persons and their interpreters. So these are just some of the challenges that people face when they try to navigate the aged care system with older persons. I will not go through a lot of them. I will just move now to the short-term recommendations that came out of that whole study. To help address the issue, FECCA initiated a collaborative process with key stakeholders, such as the previous Aged and Community Services Australia, or AXA, the Translating and Interpreting Services, or TIS National, the PCACs, or the Partners in Culturally Appropriate Care, and researchers from practice. And these are some of the short-term recommendations that came out of that whole process of roundtables with the key stakeholders. And I think many of you are also very familiar with this. I just want to highlight as well some of the long-term ones, which many of you have been, raising in various parts or sessions of this conference. Again, I will not belabor this point. We all know this. We need to support more interpreters and translators to be paid well, to be trained well, and that there should be a process of proper accreditation, but also to be provided training that will help them understand communities better. As Professor Taibbi said earlier, it's the engagement part that makes the difference. It's when you engage your communities that you learn more, you learn better how to work with them. So I really encourage everybody in this room to make and forge that relationship with the communities that you provide interpreting or translating services with. I just want to mention that in one of those many consultations that I do, I met someone from the Oromo community who was a community worker and was provided a pathway to gain NATI accreditation. She is now working as a health professional, but continues to work as a translator and interpreter in the Oromo community because, as she said, there's not many of them who are keen to be in this role. And she doesn't want members of our community to lose out on very important services or information that they need to know. Sorry. So apart from pilot testing programs like the Encompass and the small grants, FECCA also advocates via our own communication outlets or platforms to support all the advocacies that many of them have been already shared by Professor Taibbi. We have been calling for a comprehensive national language policy to ensure that language access is embedded across all government portfolios. To position language as a human right, core to health, safety, justice, civic participation, and service quality. If we put language right smack at the heart of, and we embrace that as a human right, it is a public good. Everybody who needs language support should be able to access it. And with that, government should invest appropriate resources to be able to support that. The call for sustained, coordinated national investment should not be short-term, or fragmented funding should not be the case. It is a critical public infrastructure. And having said that, it should not be placed into discretionary spending. We want to ensure that skilled language professionals are available nationwide, including emerging and rare languages, especially among people with rare languages. We need to strengthen access for migrants, refugees, temporary visa holders, and obviously the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander speakers. These are just some of the Mosaic magazine. It is our premier magazine at FECCA, where we have, in fact, run 2 issues on language. In one of those magazines, it was developed in partnership with NATI, and 10 years ago, there was already an article about machine translation, and yet it remains a hot topic up to now. This is a bit nerdy, but bear with me. In our submission for the Multicultural Framework Review, we as in FECCA, created this framework to advise government. Focusing on Pillar 7 in your screen, it shows that FECCA has always been emphasizing language as central to culture, identity, and the way in which we view and experience the world. We have always been emphasizing this in our submissions, that Australia is not just an English-speaking nation made up of English-speaking communities and families. We need to maintain, develop, and use one's language as essential for preserving and practicing culture. But more than that, that language proficiency that we could see in the community and access to support if we don't have that, it helps us, build relationships with other people in our community. A comprehensive language policy, as FECCA would always write in its policy submissions, would provide a framework for implementing second language education, supporting community language schools, professional language standards, and facilitating quality and responsive in-language services, encompassing community and professional interpreting and a strong bilingual bicultural workforce. To close, am I still on time? I would like to encourage all stakeholders of the language support sector, and that includes us at FECCA, to go back to the person, to the human at the other end of our interactions. As FECCA CEO, I have always continued to facilitate community consultations around the country. I believe it is the only way for me to really get the pulse of people in our communities. Many times, consultation participants would come to me and would say thank you. And it always touches me when they say, I can see that you can see me as a person. You don't have to speak my language, but you make that connection. I truly believe that at the heart of Jill Blewett's work to ensure high standards and regulation of the profession, at the heart of it is building trust. We cannot operate without trust. When a woman like Senna Husik cannot understand the people who provide her care, they will feel marginalized. When an older person or a person with mental health condition find that any information make the process more complicated and difficult, they fall through the cracks. When communities do not feel that their voices are reflected in the middle of a pandemic, they question whether they actually belong. Trust is at the heart of our roles in forging shared understanding, and it starts with bridging better understanding. And good engagement is where we should start. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marian. Hello. Yeah. Thank you, Marian, for such an insightful presentation. We've got time for questions now. So we've got actually about 10 minutes for questions. So please raise your hand and we'll come around with the microphone. Any questions? Can't see any hands up. Yes, we've got.
Salamat. Thank you so much for that. Magandang tanghali. I'm also from the Philippines, and I resonate very well with what you said. I wanted to share that I work within the health sector, particularly with allied health professionals, and we have recently did a research or study as well about migrant workers suffering injuries at work, and they are highly represented in the huge delay in accessing services. So it really aligns with what you said, that our communities are called workers or called participants are really missing out or having delays in services. I guess my question is, from FECCA's point of view, what is the biggest challenge that we are experiencing at the moment within our multicultural society?
Thank you. Magandang hapon. It's really about, for us, if you go down to the heart of it, it's about racism. If we truly accept that there's racism in this country, all these policies will need to change. At the moment, we're kind of like just dithering at the edges of it. There's a lot of investments, there's a lot of work that has been done so far. And communities, everybody, I think many of you have participated in the Multicultural Framework Review and have given your inputs to it. Again, now the question is, with that wealth of recommendations, there's about 80 or 90 of them, where do we go from there? So the biggest challenge for us is to have a context that is quite slow in accepting that this is truly a multicultural country. If we start accepting that and believing in that, because that's the reality of the context that we are in, policies will have to change. Thank you. And I would just add a little bit on that while she's going up to bring the microphone. Again, if we truly believe in a multicultural Australia, that means language is a priority. language is, again, a right that will be at the heart of it.
Kia ora, Agustina here from New Zealand, from Aotearoa. I thank you for your presentation, and I would like to follow up on the questions that was just asked about how it's racism that's stopping things from happening. And this is a really difficult question, how do we fight that racism that is within every single one of our institutions, within our organizations, within our professions, within us, the way that we do things, and how everything we do is quite, in New Zealand we would say Pākehā-centric, so white-centered, Eurocentric. How do we fight that, even amongst ourselves, because we still all hold those beliefs that we don't quite want to acknowledge? So what would you suggest?
Right. Sorry, I have to put on my glasses. I can't see from far. Also, I can't see from near. That's what aging is. I'm not making light of the question. It's a very important question, which in the last 2 weeks, I have been hopping from one conference to the other. Last week, there was a conference on health and well-being in multicultural communities. Yesterday, I just flew back from the Settlement Council conference. That is a question that has always been carried through in conversations in these conferences. And FECCA has been working very closely with the Australian Human Rights Commission in coming up with the Anti-Racism Framework report and its recommendations. We launched that last year. In fact, we have celebrated a year of launching that framework. And yet, we have not heard a response or a commitment to looking into and working on the recommendations of the framework. So when you ask, what do we need to do? We truly believe that advocacy has a very strong role to play, and it's not something that's limited to organizations like FECCA. Every one of us has an advocacy role, and we speak and put truth to the issue of racism. When we go out there, we need to engage and we participate in the political discussions in our communities. We need to be able to engage our politicians on a constructive way forward. We already see a lot of movements in the community that speaks to anti-migrant sentiments. While the government does not really put forward a very strong message against this, but we welcome Minister Burke's decision a few days ago. We need more of that. We need leadership in that space, because it is not the responsibility of people who are suffering from racism to fight for it. We need to have the whole of the Australian community to understand that it exists and that there's no way to go around it but to work together. I hope that answers your question, but these are, the very fundamental questions that's hard to, answer.
Thank you for such a wonderful talk that was deep, a bit nerdy, but also I think struck a chord with many of us. I'm from the University of Queensland, the School of Languages and Cultures, and we've been doing a lot of work in the pipeline to understand what we call a crisis in language education. My experience over the last 5 years of asking questions about this is that it seems to me that there's a shared societal understanding that language is a migrant's business, and that all of that domain, much like you were talking about in terms of racism, is on us as a migrant rather than everybody within the community. And from my perspective, I feel like racism also stems from a lack of shared language learning and appreciation, multilingualism, because we all know as plurilinguals that when you see the world through someone else's eyes and understand it from a different perspective, you cannot be racist. what do you think we need to be doing to fix this massive breakdown of language learning? Just to update everybody, last year, 3 times more grade 12 students took health PE than a language. That is our next workforce. What do we do?
Right. And we have a whole heap of conferences by AUSIT to look at those issues year in, year out. Again, very important question, a massive one. How do we respond to, maintenance of language, culture, but also, I take it from your question, how do we make sure that people have access to language? Am I correct?
100%.
Yeah. Again, going back to, if you read the Multicultural Framework Review Report, and again, there's the Department of Home Affairs here, if you look at the number of recommendations there, much of it is really about, sustaining or making sure the language support sector is going to be sustainable. That is really critical. But beyond that, language is not just the language support sector. As you said earlier, it's also about making sure language learning is available in schools. Where are they available? Why are they not available in all schools nationwide? But also, it should be spoken in communities, and we should encourage communities to use their language when they interact with other communities. I was struggling actually when I was looking at the title of this presentation, because I started with the value of shared language. But then it might seem to mean that we need to have one language for us to then understand each other. So then I shared it to forging shared understanding, because we may have, again, 400 languages, but we ensure that we connect, we partner, we collaborate, and we engage people around us in the community, our colleagues, our families. I guess that's the right path for us to share, to have a shared understanding. And I'm speaking about connecting not just in the multicultural, well, again, when we say multicultural, it's supposedly everybody, it's not just CALD. So what I'm saying is the conversation on language, racism, multiculturalism should not be something that happens within the sector. We have become an echo chamber, actually. We are the same people talking about the same things, but we need to move forward and, work it so that we also engage the mainstream of the society to understand how beautiful it is to have 400 languages that's available for this country.
Thank you very much. My name's Heather Glass. I'm a translator, interpreter, trainer, researcher, and also a delegate for Professionals Australia, the union that represents translators and interpreters. I know we've written to you, and we certainly look forward to your response and to being able to engage with FECCA. This issue of racism, I've been having conversations in my role as a delegate in Western Australia with leaders of FECCA and leaders of the multicultural community, because we have had several instances recently of interpreters having negative experiences with service deliverers. And it's very hard for me to say this publicly, but those negative experiences have been at the hands of cold service provider staff. Your comment that this is something that we must all take on, that we must all reflect on, I think I'm sort of ad-libbing your words a bit. But it's something that we all need to share and recognise. Racism is not limited to people that look and sound like me. I'm white, Anglo-Saxon, raised Protestant. It is endemic in just about every society, not just Australian. And for us as interpreters, there is no them and us. When we go in to do an interpreting job, we have two people who do not share a common language. They both have a communication problem. In many instances, it will be the mainstream English speaker who has the bigger problem. The person that they are dealing with probably has more English than they have of that person's language. So for us, there is no them and us in our work. I think if there's any message from what you are saying to us today, it is there is no them and us, full stop. If there is racism out there, it's something we must all explore in ourselves, in our own hearts, and make sure that we're not projecting it out, that we're not creating a them and us, that we are truly a multicultural community. So I'm sorry, it's not a question, it's a comment. But I just wanted to... I'm actually shaking. People won't believe that Heather Glass feels nervous, but I'm feeling very nervous at the moment. But I really do think that that's the strong message.
I really appreciate that, and I agree with you. There should not be them and us. I personally have been subjected to racist, incidents from people who are not Anglo-Australian, people who are, like many of you here, a migrant, from culturally and linguistically diverse groups. I have been told that I don't represent FECCA because I'm a Filipino. I don't even know what that question means, but okay. I am not also minimizing. We have heard of those instances, and we have been looking into that. And we see a lot of these in aged care, disability care, very in the last few years. And again, there's this on one hand, you see people who are being put in a state of work where there is a lot of demand, there's a lot of pressure, but at the same time, they're being paid lowly. But also at the same time, when we say cultural competency, it doesn't mean only on the other side. We need to be competent of other people's cultures. And I agree truly with you that it is a question that we all have to ask ourselves, and it's a challenge that we have to put on ourselves to, not continue with this kind of energy, because it's really debilitating to community members, because as I have known in this particular case, that conversation becomes very difficult. Services become, frozen, because people can't move forward with the kind of situation that's happening. So again, I don't have a perfect solution to it, but to agree that there should not be us and them. We all need to recognize that there's racism. Everybody is a victim to it. Even for me who works in this space, people do that to me. But yes, there are many things that we could learn from, but also I go back to what I said earlier. The advocacy doesn't stop. We need to continue talking about it, and we need to continue providing policy solutions, programs, and services that could help address this. But more importantly, we need to be able to convince, pressurize, I don't know what else I can say, for data to be made available, for data to be also at the center of all these work that you are all doing, because that's the only way that we could say, yes, we could bring it to the government that, yes, with proper interpreting and translating services, we are able to then have a better health outcomes, not the health outcome that I just showed you in my slides earlier. I just had this conversation with Emiliano earlier over lunch that yes, if language is a basic human right, then everybody, each government should be made, responsible to making it happen. In which case, investments should be made available, and we all work, all of us, we all work together in making sure people access them. Sorry for mentioning you, Emiliana. He's a very good friend of mine.
Thank you, Marianne. What a great way to conclude this session.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
I'd like to present you with a gift as well. Thank you for your presentation again. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending. This is the end of our session.